Hi, how the heck are you? Every year across every streaming platform, society witnesses the launch of new sitcoms. Historically, shows like Cheers, Friends, and Seinfeld have become not just the most watched shows on TV, but they've also become so culturally ubiquitous that even without watching them, you've probably been exposed to a ton of references from them, maybe without even knowing it. But the world is a harsh place, and without the warm blanket of viewership metrics, for every wild success in the sitcom world, there are many, many failures. I don't particularly want to live in a world where The Big Bang Theory runs for 12 seasons and has 2 spin-off shows, while excellent shows like Don't Trust the Bee and Apartment 23 are left out in the cold to freeze and are subsequently canceled, but baby, that's the world we live in. So given how hard it is for new sitcoms to make an impact and secure their cultural foothold, it's only natural that studio execs the world over will try and take their successes and establish spin-off shows to capitalize on the goodwill of existing fans. And this method works nearly every time. Can you even imagine a world without renowned classics like Joey, That 90s Show, How I Met Your Father, or Fuller House? I can't. So when a once-in-a-decade show like The Office comes along, it's hard for the people making money off it to not see more potential dollar signs earned through a spin-off. Before we launch into the fun, please leave a like and hit subscribe so I can keep making videos I love like this one. And with that, here we go. According to actor Jim O'Heir in his memoir, Welcome to Pawnee, Stories of Friendship, Waffles, and Parks and Recreation, the initial idea to spin The Office off into another show began when Jim Halpert's character transferred to the Stamford branch of Dunder Mifflin. This introduction to the new cast of characters at that branch served as a potential avenue to produce a second show centered around that office and its employees. But U.S. Office series creator Greg Daniels decided against it at the time, instead absorbing the Ed Helms character Andy Bernard into the main cast and running a season with Rashida Jones as Karen to cause friction between Jim and Pam. So with the first swing at a secondary show fizzling, Daniels and Office writer/producer Michael Schur decided to pursue a different avenue to extend the workplace comedy universe they had created together. Parks and Recreation stands strongly on its own as one of the greatest modern sitcoms of all time. It was originally planned to be a spin-off of The Office. It's clear when watching Parks and Rec that the tone of the show is very confused and unsure of itself in the first season. Leslie, who throughout the show is a vibrant, over-the-top, universally loved character, is portrayed as more of a Michael Scott. She's less interesting, her interactions with her staff are off-putting, and she's clearly designed to be kind of a loser in the eyes of the viewers. And the whole cast is like this. Ron isn't his normal caricature of a libertarian working in local government. Tom isn't hustling to make money with some big idea he has. April is nothing more than a weird girl that isn't really connected to the rest of the cast at all. And Ann and Andy are just an unhappy couple on the verge of collapse because of Andy's reliance on Ann for everything. The show is less colorful, more aggressive, and just generally less pleasant to watch than it is in subsequent seasons. And that's because it was attempting to hold more Office DNA than it ended up maintaining as further seasons aired. It's pretty widely agreed upon that the first season, which is thankfully only 6 episodes long, is by far the weakest of the show, but the final episode of that season, Rock Show, which saw the cast attending a concert put on by Andy's band Mouse Rat, is cited by critics and viewers alike to be the beginning of the beloved show that it would eventually become. So Parks was nearly unsuccessful, and by cutting its narrative ties to The Office before it even began airing, and then cutting its spiritual successor Tone to move in another more earnest direction, it found resounding success and a massive fandom independent of The Office. The final attempt at a second show in the same universe while The Office was still airing was the backdoor pilot episode The Farm in the final season of the show. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a backdoor pilot is an episode of a TV show that is written as a potential spin-off. It's far cheaper to produce than a whole new pilot for a show, as it's able to use existing writers, cast, and crew to establish a new angle rather than having to build it all up from scratch. The Farm is notoriously very weird. It introduced estranged, never-mentioned members of Dwight's family, including a brother that he somehow never talked about in the many seasons of the show leading up to this episode, and it shoehorned in a love interest for him opposite Angela at a crucial point in their narrative in the final season of the show. I know that when I was first seeing it, I was struck with wonder at the idea of this new show, because at the time, fans of the show were very sad to see it go, even though it had, by some estimation, run its course a few seasons beforehand. However, with the benefit of knowing what kinds of things were successful on TV post-finale, I've come around in the many years since then to the idea that The Farm seems like it would have been a bit soulless. And the lack of an immediate follow-up to The Office meant that it would find an even greater audience in the intervening years. For those of you in my age range who remember the entire airing of the original US Office, I'm sorry to inform you that it ended in 2013, 12 years ago. My back hurts. Since that series ended, it's maintained its cultural relevance and become even more codified in our public consciousness. It was a linchpin series for the comfort binge seekers on Netflix for years after it was made available to stream there. I can say that when I was in college, I had a running total of my rewatches, and I had seen it somewhere around, I think, 30 times in my early 20s. This constant front-to-back rewatching was a very normal pastime for a lot of people in those days, and that behavior became so ubiquitous that there's a trope of some millennials' entire personality being their fandom of The Office. The series has seen forays into all kinds of merchandise, including a very popular line of Funko Pops, a few Lego sets, and even branded Dunder Mifflin shirts and apparel so popular it can still be found in Targets around the country to this day. Fans have maintained their feverish love for the series, probably even more intensely than they did when it was originally airing, and since NBC's launch of their streaming service Peacock, it has remained one of the service's most streamed series, even sometimes taking up 2 slots on that list, as NBC has released so-called superfan episodes that incorporate a ton of unused and cut footage from the original production of the show. As a side note, I tried to watch some of these when the initial season of them became available, but so much of the footage was cut for such good reasons that in my mind, the superfan episodes do a lot to mess up the characterizations of a lot of the cast by including improvised lines and confessionals that don't work at all in the context of the show at large. But regardless of my opinion of those episodes, they've done a lot to keep longtime hungry fans satisfied with more of what they want to see. Another source of more for many fans has been Angela Kinsey's and Jenna Fischer's Office Ladies podcast. This is one of the main culprits in something I absolutely hate in modern podcasting, a rewatch show. If you've ever liked a TV show that stars anyone that hasn't found immense Hollywood film successes since the show ended, you have likely encountered a rewatch podcast of that show hosted by some of its original cast. These are generally a sort of eye-rolling cash grab on the part of the hosts, but in the case of Office Ladies, the real-life friendship between Kinsey and Fischer is as important to the audience as the inside scoop on all the Office episodes they rewatch. The podcast has served as an important supplement for many Office fans and has run for 260 episodes at the time of my writing this script. So it's clear fans have wanted more ever since the show's end, and now, 12 years later, somehow, it actually happened. In January of 2024, it was announced that Greg Daniels was developing a new show in the Office universe with a new cast set in a new office. I recall around that time hearing all over social media and from my friends in person that there was an Office reboot being developed. The wires seemed to cross for a ton of people writing articles about this news, and the public perception of the show was that it would be a recreation of the previous US series with new actors. Luckily, this wasn't the case, but as more news was announced about it throughout 2024, the initial cynicism of the fan base beginning with the idea of a reboot continued to fester amongst online fandoms, and the public didn't seem optimistic about resurrecting something so beloved after all this time. In April of that year, it was announced that Domhnall Gleeson would be playing the lead in the series, and that was met with even more confusion. Gleeson is one of Hollywood's most talented Nepo babies, and historically is probably more known for his dramatic roles and his famous portrayal of Bill Weasley in the Harry Potter film franchise alongside his father Brendan Gleeson, who played Mad-Eye Moody. The idea of him leading a mockumentary series and following in the footsteps of Steve Carell's Michael Scott was baffling to some, myself included. Additionally, it was announced that Oscar Nunez would be returning as Oscar Martinez from the original series, and the direct connection to the beloved Dunder Mifflin appeared to be a nostalgia cash-in, leaving the fandom feeling very negative about the new show's potential. Trailers began to air as a part of the show's marketing campaign several weeks before it launched on Peacock, and my personal opinion of those trailers is that they were tremendously unsuccessful in selling what the show show would be. They relied on the connection to The Office and Oscar's character very heavily, and the jokes chosen to represent the show were some of the worst in the entire series. Around the same time as this marketing campaign, it was announced that NBC would be dropping the entire season simultaneously on Peacock, and historically, this has been seen as a very negative move in advance of a new streaming program, as the standard for some time has been weekly episodes to reflect the format of watching a prestige television show. Personally, I was only interested in seeing how bad the show would be when it launched, until I was scrolling TikTok one day and an ad for the show appeared on my For You page. This was a clip from the 7th episode of the show, entitled I Love You, in which the cast were holding a staff meeting and trying to maintain the appearance of the meeting going well in order to show their boss that the newspaper was successful as he sat on the same floor inside of their meeting room. I was so taken aback by how optimistic this tiny little slice of uninterrupted interaction between characters made me about the show that I went and showed my girlfriend right after I finished watching it. So when the show dropped a few weeks ago, we started watching it together, and within a couple of days we had finished it and were both extremely sad to have run out of episodes to watch, which led me to writing this video. This show could so easily have been what fans feared it would be. When unsuccessful spin-offs launch with non-stop references to their source material, they read as kitschy and like they only exist to cash in on fandom goodwill, but that they can't stand on their own 2 feet without the crutch of the beloved original to support them. The paper starts out with an interview with Bob Vance talking about how Dunder Mifflin was bought out and left the office park. And the first time I watched the show, I was taken aback by the brazen attempt to capture fan interest so immediately by making it clear this was just a follow-up to The Office. But upon further reflection, that scene does a perfect job setting the stage for what this show is by giving a small morsel of fan service and then moving on to the original concepts of the new show. We're led into the world of the Toledo Truth Teller by Ken, a character so clearly acting as a David Brent type in a sequence that is extremely reminiscent of the opening of both the UK and US offices. He wanders around the office making bad jokes and acting like he's the center of the show's universe, and we even get an introduction to Mayor in a similar scene as our first exposure to Jim on The Office. But these fun references aren't cheap hooks to keep the viewer interested. They still act as introductions to these new characters, and similarities aside, the thing that I think makes the show so deeply successful on its own is how wonderfully these new characters are brought to life throughout the entire first season. Ned Sampson is introduced as the new boss of the paper, and at first glance he does share some qualities with Michael Scott. He's a former wildly successful toilet paper salesman, and he's initially presented as a romantic, excitable go-getter looking to reinvigorate the quiet, dying print media landscape in Toledo, Ohio. The importance here is that although he shares many of these attributes with Michael, he's so distinctly encapsulated as a different character, even within the first episode, that he is immediately set apart from him. He trauma dumps on Mayor about his family problems and his story of what led him to want the job as editor-in-chief, and it's clear he is a very different brand of annoying boss. He does the heavy lifting of portraying his negative, sometimes overbearing character flaws as a still very likable, earnest force for rehabilitation of the paper and a strong proponent of his journalistic principles. Likewise, Mare is portrayed in a very similar vein to Jim. She does her job well with little to no effort put forth on her part and sees it as just a job rather than having any deeper investment in the success of the paper until Ned comes along to encourage and push her to be the journalist she once was when she served in the army. These sort of examples really reveal the central thesis of what I think makes the show work so well. It takes in the comfort food aspects of what it knows viewers and longtime fans of The Office loved about that show, but instead of taking one-to-one concepts like transposing all of Jim's character traits directly onto Mare and just calling it good, it respects its viewers and gives us little bits of flavor that remind us of Jim's character arc while still maintaining a very strong original characterization for Mare herself. The complexity of writing an emotionally stunted, strong female lead with a background in the military, and then halfway through the season having her open up enough to reveal that she was a theater kid in school and that she still holds on to resentment for her teacher that passed on her as the lead in a play is 1,000,000 times more nuanced than I expected these characters to have in a show that could so easily have maintained a modest fan base without trying to create something original at all. Ned does sort of a reverse Michael Scott trajectory throughout the season, wherein he starts out earnest and likable And episode to episode, his flaws are revealed and become more apparent until the episode where he tells his boss that he loves him, and his father-son trauma is fully present to everyone in the office. He's played as more and more cartoonish and comedic as the season goes on, but because the core of his character is his earnestness and love for journalism, I still found myself rooting for him no matter how crazy he went. As my girlfriend and I watched the show together, I took some loose notes for this script, and one of the through lines for me was how earnest the show was in general. Jokes are made between characters at one another's expense, but aside from Esmeralda and Ken at the beginning of the season, by and large, everyone is looking out for each other as a team the whole time. There's an exchange between Adalola and Travis in one episode where she goes too far, and he says that to her, and she immediately agrees and apologizes. And that kind of thing reminded me far more of Parks and Rec than it did of The Office. I think the show takes a lot of notes from what made the cast of Parks work so harmoniously, and likely due to the harshness and daily evils we're exposed to in the world we currently live in, the paper leans into kindness, family, and teamwork dynamics super consistently. This makes the experience of viewing the show to be extremely enjoyable, and even in episodes where more classic cringe The Office comedic beats occur, the harmony is brought rushing back between characters that aren't part of the cringy content nearly immediately. This gives the show a more dynamic energy and allows for more late-stage Office-style jokes and situations to take place early on, because this show is so deeply confident in its tone and its characters from the first episode. The supporting cast are also a bright point, and they're introduced and fleshed out slower throughout the season. Adalola, Nicole, Travis, Dietrich, Barry, and Adam are all featured in every episode, but the small glimpses we get into their characters are spread a bit less thick than the main few characters the plot focuses on. This makes repeat viewings of the show to be more fun because the context of the characters from later in the season exists, and you get to view them through the lens of that context in earlier episodes before we know them so well. The characters are played so consistently that it does give you more insight into their thoughts and feelings in earlier episodes, which is a really enjoyable way to have a different experience the second time through. The final supporting character, Oscar, is handled extremely well in a way that I think does a good job of not pulling focus from introducing all of the original characters to rely on a legacy actor. His whole arc throughout the season is that he's haunted by the fact that the documentary crew has followed him for so much of his life, and he therefore avoids them and tries to stay in the background and be as uninteresting as possible when they're around him. And he very literally melts into the scenery for the first several episodes until he begins to warm into interacting with the crew again, and eventually does his talking head segments and begins to act as his gossipy, know-it-all self that we're all familiar with from The Office. Getting him out of the way to allow us to fall in love with the new cast, and then slowly introducing him into the existing dynamics between the new characters that we've grown to know after a few episodes, was a really good way to allow the audience to warm up to the new cast and not sacrifice Oscar's character. When he eventually goes in on the documentary again and is interacting with everybody else, he's played so consistently to his character from The Office, and I think he really shines as the perfect connective tissue between the two shows for that exact reason. I can't think of another character from The Office that could have been dropped into this show the way he was that would have been anywhere near as successful a transfer. His arc culminating in him deciding he was born to be a documentary subject is a good turn, and I think he's going to get to stretch into even more of his self-centered character from the seasons of The Office where he dated the senator in the second season of the paper. The central romantic plot between Ned and Mare is also handled and paced really well, and that's another thing I enjoyed even more the second time around because I knew where their relationship ended up in the finale. Overall, I'm shocked at how much I love the paper. I've recommended it to nearly everyone I know who's a fan of The Office, and it's no wonder to me that it's remained the #1 show on Peacock for as long as it now has. I am so excitedly anticipating the next season, and I can't wait to see these characters grow and learn together and spend more time in a world that brings me so much comfort and joy. Do yourself a favor and go watch it. Maybe even a few times. Don't forget to leave a comment about your favorite parts of the show or to let me know what you didn't like about it. And please like and subscribe for more of my content. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.